Nightfall descended upon the deserted road, and the dim glow of the street lights flickered over the thin layer of snow covering the sidewalk. A small shadow trudged forward, leaving tiny yet determined footprints on the icy ground. It was a dog. Its matted fur was soaked by the freezing rain, and every step it took seemed burdened as if the weight of the world pressed down on its tiny paws. No one knew how far it had traveled, only that it never stopped. There was no companion, no familiar voice calling its name, only the sound of the bitter wind whistling through the barren trees. Its eyes were fixed on a distant place, a home, a memory, a name it once heard every day. Maximum. That name still echoed in its mind, though the voice that spoke it had long faded. Max didn't know how long it had been walking. It only knew one thing. It had to go back. Max once had a family, a warm little home filled with laughter, gentle hands that stroked its soft fur, peaceful nights sleeping by the doorstep, knowing that its owner would always be there. But then, one day, everything disappeared. A strange car arrived, cardboard boxes, belongings packed in a hurry. One last hug, a final wave. Then the car door closed. Max was left behind. It didn't understand. It didn't know that humans had plans, changes it could never predict. It only knew one thing. Its owner was gone, and it had to find them. 100 kilometers. A meaningless number to humans, but for a small dog, it was an unimaginable journey. Max crossed desolate fields, unfamiliar roads, and towns it had never seen before. It survived on scraps of food carelessly tossed aside by strangers. It curled up under the cold awning of a roadside diner to sleep. Every time hunger twisted in its stomach, it remembered the small bowl of food in the old kitchen, the one placed down by familiar hands, always with a smile. The winter wind cut into its skin, but it didn't stop. The freezing rain soaked through its fur, but it kept walking. Max didn't know that people had seen it, capturing its sorrowful eyes in photographs. The images spread across the internet, accompanied by words of sympathy. Does anyone recognize this dog? But Max didn't care. It wasn't looking for strangers. It was searching for only one place. A bitter wind swept through, seeping into Max's drenched fur. It shivered, curling up beneath the worn-out awning of an abandoned gas station. Its stomach ached with hunger. 2 days had passed since Max had last found food. A dry piece of bread someone had dropped on the roadside. But today the streets were empty. No one was there to notice it. It had once been fed every day. Full meals, gentle hands stroking its fur. But now the world had never felt so cruel. Max's eyes darted around, searching for something, anything, that could help it continue its journey. In the distance, a garbage dump. The stench of spoiled food mixed with the acrid smell of oil and waste. But Max had no other choice. Slowly it stepped forward, its legs trembling, yet still moving ahead. As Max approached the garbage dump, a low growl echoed. It flinched, stepping back. From the shadows, a stray dog emerged. Its filthy gray fur was matted with dirt. A long scar ran across its muzzle, and its sharp eyes gleamed with wariness. Max understood. This was no longer the safe world it once knew. Here, you either fought or you were left behind. Lowering its head, Max signaled submission, but the stray had no intention of sharing. It stepped forward, baring its teeth, a clear warning for Max not to take another step. Max hesitated. It wasn't a fighter. It was just a dog that once had a home, once had an owner who loved it. It didn't know how to fight for survival. And so, Max turned away. Hunger gnawed at its stomach. But in this world, the weak would never get a share. Max kept walking, dragging its paws along the freezing pavement. It didn't know where it was going. It only knew that if it stopped, it wouldn't be able to go on. Then suddenly, a voice called out, "Hey, dog!" Max flinched and looked up. A boy, about 10 years old, stood on the steps of a convenience store. He wore a thick coat and held a sandwich in his hands. Max's eyes lit up. It didn't know who this boy was, but it recognized the scent of food. Max couldn't help itself. It took slow steps forward, its tail wagging slightly, eyes full of silent pleading. The boy blinked, then crouched down, breaking off a piece of his sandwich and holding it out. Max hesitated, but then it took a chance. cautiously reaching forward and gently taking the piece of bread from the boy's hand. For the first time in days, it felt warmth. But just then, another voice rang out. "Don't touch it, Tom! It's dirty!" A woman, his mother, hurried over, pulling him away. She frowned at Max, her eyes filled with hesitation and caution. Max was just a stray, a creature that belonged nowhere. It looked at the boy one last time. He seemed like he wanted to say something, but his mother was already leading him away. Max stood there. Its tail stopped wagging. The piece of bread remained half chewed in its mouth. Then it turned away, because this was not a place for it. Max continued its journey, but sometimes it wondered, was its owner looking for it? Did anyone still remember it? Memories rushed in like a cold wind. The image of a small house with a wooden door frame. The image of a man smiling, tossing a rubber ball for it to chase. The image of gentle hands stroking its head every night before sleep. They were still there, vivid, as if they had happened just yesterday. But now they were only fading shadows, slipping further away with time. Max didn't understand. Why had the world changed? Why had it been left behind? But no matter what, it couldn't turn back, because it had to find its way home. Max kept walking, growing weaker with each passing day. Hunger had become a familiar part of its body. The cold was something it could no longer escape. But its eyes never lost their glimmer of hope, because it knew, no matter how hard it was, no matter how many unfamiliar roads lay ahead, it was closer than ever. The old house, its owner. They were only a few days away. Max continued its journey, but this time its steps were no longer steady. Days of hunger had drained its strength. Cold nights left it trembling, each fragile breath feeling as though it could be swept away by the wind at any moment. Yet even as its body grew weak, Max's heart never wavered. It knew it was close, but the final challenge was not over yet. Max trudged through a sparse forest. The wind whispered through the bare branches, rustling like the murmurs of nature itself. It could smell the snow, the scent of broken twigs, and blood. Max froze. Up ahead, nestled among withered grass, a rabbit lay motionless. Max didn't know what had happened. It only knew one thing. It needed to eat. It stepped forward, breathing heavily, eyes locked onto the small, lifeless body. But just then, snap! The world tilted. A sharp, searing pain shot up from Max's leg to its head. It let out a weak, broken howl before collapsing onto the ground. Its front paw was caught in a steel trap. Cold. Pain. Max thrashed, but each movement only made the iron jaws tighten around its leg. Panic crashed over it like a tidal wave. It had come so far, it couldn't give up now. Max whimpered, summoning every ounce of strength to pull itself free. Once, twice, blood began to trickle from the deep gashes, staining the snow beneath it. But it didn't stop. It couldn't stop. Through the pain, Max suddenly heard a sound. Footsteps. Someone was approaching. Max tensed, its vision blurred from exhaustion. A human. Would they help? Or were they the one who had set the trap? Max's heart pounded, its breath quick and shallow. Fear surged through it, but then a voice spoke. "Oh God, a dog!" A man knelt down, his eyes filled with surprise. He wore a thick coat, a wooden stick in his hand. Max couldn't run. All it could do was lie there, waiting for its fate. The man studied it for a moment, then slowly crouched down. Max no longer had the strength to resist. It could only look up, pleading with its eyes. The man let out a sigh. Then he reached for the trap. Click! Max felt its leg come free. The pain was still there, but at least it was no longer trapped. The man looked at it, then spoke softly. "What are you doing out here, little one?" But Max couldn't answer. It had only one thought. Keep going. No matter the pain, no matter the exhaustion, it couldn't stop now. The man watched, his eyes full of uncertainty, but he didn't stop Max. And so Max walked on. Weak, trembling steps, yet more determined than ever. Now every step was painful, but when Max lifted its gaze, it saw the distant glow of a small town. It was close. It could feel it. It was almost home. And then, in the grip of exhaustion, it collapsed. But in the haze of a dream, it saw something. A hand, a smile, a warm voice calling its name. Max, come here. Max slowly opened its eyes. The sky was still gray, snowflakes drifting down. Its body was numb, and pain shot through its front leg with every attempt to move. But just ahead, not far away, a familiar road appeared. A wooden fence worn by time. An old gate with rusty hinges that creaked whenever the wind passed through. The old house. Max didn't know if it had cried. It only felt its heart pounding in its chest, as if it had been waiting for this moment its entire life. With every last ounce of strength, it stepped forward. Max stood at the door, its legs trembling from exhaustion. It gazed at the wooden door, the same door that had always opened whenever it ran home, the place it once believed would always be its own. It gently scratched at the surface. No answer. It waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, a lifetime. But no one opened the door. Max stepped back, confusion filling its weary eyes. It looked up at the window. No light, no shadow. It turned to glance around. Everything looked exactly as it did in its memories. Yet it felt completely empty. This house was no longer its home. Max didn't know what to do. It only knew how to sit there, staring at the door as if waiting just a little longer would make its owner step out, call its name like they always had. But then, footsteps sounded behind it. A middle-aged man stood there, wearing a worn-out coat, his face filled with surprise. "Little one, you were their dog, weren't you?" Max looked up. The man let out a sigh. He knew how far Max had traveled to return here. But he also knew its owner was never coming back. They were never coming home. The man sat down beside Max. He didn't need to say much. Max didn't need to hear anything. It only felt an emptiness slowly consume its mind. It had found its way home. But home was gone forever. A cold wind blew past. The wooden door trembled slightly as if whispering a reminder that no one was behind it anymore. Max lowered its head. For the first time, it didn't know where to go. The man gently placed his hand on Max's head. "Little one, you've come such a long way." He couldn't leave Max here. It couldn't keep going alone. And then, he stood up and held out his hand. "Come on, let's go home." Max blinked. Home? Its home was gone. But maybe, home wasn't a place. It was someone willing to open their door. Max looked at the man for a long moment, and then it stood up. Its first step was heavy, but this time, it wasn't alone. It didn't look back at the old house, because it knew. Sometimes the journey isn't about finding the past. It's about finding a new place to begin again. Max slept peacefully in a new home. For the first time in months, it felt warmth. No more howling winds, no more gnawing hunger. Beside it was a soft blanket, a full bowl of food, and someone who had saved it from loneliness. When morning came, Max would wake up to a new world. It didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but this time, it wasn't afraid, because it knew it would never have to walk alone again. Not everyone is lucky enough to find what they've lost. Sometimes we travel far, overcome our greatest challenges, only to realize that what we were searching for is no longer there. But that doesn't mean the journey was meaningless, because it's what we experience along the way, the people we meet, that truly matters. Max lost its old family, but it found someone new, a place to call home once again. And maybe that's what all of us are searching for in life. Not a place, but a person willing to be there, waiting for us. Thank you for reading this far. If this story touched your heart, please hit like and subscribe so we can bring you more meaningful stories.